Hi there, this is Dr. Sami Garas. In this video, we will continue talking about the audit cycle. We said in the previous chapters that when the auditor starts an engagement, first of all, he and the client has to make the engagement letter, which stipulates the auditor's responsibility and the client's responsibility. And based on that, the auditor has to develop good understanding about the client industry, about the client operation, and the auditor has to put the strategy, the program of the audit, and try to put an estimate for the audit fees. Once the auditor develops some understanding about the client, he has to check the internal control. And this is the reason in the previous chapter we talked about the internal control based on COSO framework, where the auditor has to check the control environment, try to assess the risk, see the control activities and how the information is communicated, and finally make some kind of monitoring. And now the auditor has to collect some evidence for his audit. And in the previous chapter, we say the evidence can go under two different groups: evidence for test of controls. If the auditor understands and appreciates the internal control, then he doesn't do everything from scratch. He just makes some kind of inquiry or inspection to the documents or observation to the operation or make some kind of re-performance to the data entry. If the auditor doesn't trust the internal control, then he has to make substantive testing by making a physical examination to the assets, analytical procedures, some kind of recalculation and inspection. So now the auditor needs to collect evidence, and the auditor cannot collect evidence for everything. The auditor has to take sample because it's completely unrealistic for the auditor to collect evidence for every transaction, because it's going to take a lot of time for him to audit the process. So he has to do some kind of sampling. And we don't usually recommend big sample or small sample because both of them, they create some problems. So in this chapter, we will talk about the audit sampling. So with this in mind, let us take a quick look on the points or the figure that I showed you in the previous presentations. If you remember, we say here, the auditor has to plan for the audit, develop understanding, assess the risk of material misstatement based on the internal control. Then the auditor has to do some kind of test of control and substantive procedures. And in this chapter for the test of control and analytical procedures, the auditor has to make some sample. And if you remember in the previous chapter, we say the test of control include inquiry, inspection, observation, re-performance, substantive procedures, examine the assets, recalculate the invoices or the receipts, send confirmation to the clients or suppliers, and make some kind of analytical procedures. So with this in mind, that in this chapter, we will talk about the representative sampling. And what do we mean by representative sampling? It means how the sample reflects the main population truly without any bias. Then we talk about two different types of sampling. First one is statistical, where we use some kind of algorithm. And here we can use Microsoft Excel or IDEA. And this is the reason the IDEA assignment of this week, which is already available now, talks about the different types of sampling. And the statistical sampling might include probabilistic sampling or non-probabilistic sampling. And then we talk about the exceptions rate, which means the outliers that might go out of the sample. The non-statistical sampling, we talk about them like judgmental sampling. We don't use any algorithm, but we use our experience. And we can use non-statistical sampling for test of control or substantive testing, which we call it test of details. And finally, we talk about attribute sampling in test of control and substantive testing as well. The main part of this chapter will focus on statistical, because this is what we usually do And for the class of auditing, we focus on that because we need to teach the students how to make realistic sampling based on a statistical method. And once they develop their career in auditing, they will be able to make the non-statistical sampling based on their experience. The standard we use it here and we refer to in my presentation in the textbook as well. It's the AS2315 in PCAOB and AU section 350 for AICPA. I strongly encourage you to go through those standards to know how the regulators are requiring the auditor to set up the right principles for sampling. The representative sampling, which is the first point, should represent the population in a true way. What are the population we talk about in auditing? Like all the customers, all the suppliers, all the employees, all the visitors of the website, and so on. From those populations, we try to select sampling based on the amounts or the delinquency of the suppliers or the customers, the aging or the regions. And a good sample should have the same characteristics of the population. What are the risks that the auditor might fall into is the sampling risk or non-sampling risk. What is the sampling risk? The auditor might choose a small sample or a big sample. So here, the first risk regarding the size. If the auditor chooses a big sample to make sure that the sample represents the population in a true way, then the auditor will spend more time to audit this sample, which will increase his fees, and this will reduce his efficiency because the auditor has to spend, for example, 1 week auditing. If he chooses a big size, it means he will spend maybe 10 days instead of 1 week, and this means will increase his fees. So he might lose the client in the next year because of the sampling risk. The other thing that the auditor might choose a small sample. If he chooses a small sample to reduce his time, he might end up issuing incorrect opinion because the sample he chose is not representing the population. So remember, both big and the small sampling might create other problems. So how the auditor chooses the right sample, we say use the statistical methods, which we will explain it in this chapter. The other risk that the auditor might fall into is the items. The auditor might choose the right sample, but the items included in the sample doesn't reflect the main populations. The non-sampling risk, maybe the auditor doesn't consider the outliers in the sampling or might not make effective audit procedures like program, strategy, budget, and so on. Based on that, he might fall into one of the non-sampling risks. So how the auditor can respond to those risks? Number one, the auditor has to design the process of the sample in a professional way, select the items in the sample in a correct way, and evaluate the results before making a generalization about the sample. So the auditor has to be very careful about his choice of the sample. And as I said, we have two different ways. One, we call it the statistical, which falls into two groups, probabilistic and non-probabilistic. The phases for the statistical sampling: first, plan the sample, select the sample, run the test, and evaluate the results. If he uses a statistical, then he has to repeat step 1 and 3 every time he's making the sample. The non-statistical sampling, as I said, it's based on the auditor experience, and it usually is made by the audit partner who spent long number of years in auditing and has good experience with the client. The probabilistic sampling, it's each item has the same probability to be included in the sample, and it uses statistical methods. The non-probabilistic sampling It's any other method the auditor can choose. What are the methods that can be used in selecting the sample? The first one is the random. And I'm going to show you now in this video how to do the random sampling by Excel. And in my video for the assignment, it will show you how to make random sampling using IDEA. The other one is systematic, and here also we can use Excel or IDEA. The third one, probability proportional to size sampling. The non-probabilistic sampling, haphazard, and block sampling. And I'm not going to talk about them for the shortage of time we have it in class in this semester. So how can we make the random sampling? We can use the Excel to generate random numbers about the sampling, or we can use a spreadsheet or generalized audit software. And here's an example where we need to select 50 items in a population that falls between 3,680 number and 9,452. And the software will generate here 50 items randomly. And then if we sort them here, we can see that the software has selected this one. There is lots of softwares in the market that can help you to make the random sample. And I'm going to use Excel because it's available for everyone in class. With this in mind, let us take a look on this exercise. Here we have as a population of 6,000 records or invoices, bill of lading of 5,250, which is the difference between 1,000 and 6,250. And we have the customer ledger, which has 30 pages. And in each page, we have 50 lines. So how can I make a random sample from those 6 invoices, assuming that my sample size is 10? So to do that, we use the function random between. So we say random between 1 and 6,000, and it will generate the numbers here, as you can see. If I click F9, it will change the selected numbers. And the numbers are selected randomly. So here to use the random sample, we use rand between. We can do the same for the bill of lading. So here we can say rand between 1,000 and 6,250. And if I click F9, it will keep it changing all the numbers. The same thing for the customer pages, and the same thing for the customer lines. So rand between is the function. We use it in Excel to create a random sample. In IDEA, we use random generator editor, and we use random to select the records and to create a database of the randomly selected sample. And both of them are explained on my video. So random sample is very easy. Anyone can do. Now, the second exercise I have it here is the systematic sample. In systematic sample, we use random sample, but when we select the number, we use a systematic way. So for example, I need to select a sample of 75 items from the sample, the population, I have it in my previous example, but I will start selecting the sample by invoice 39. In the same way, I need to create a systematic sample from the bill of lading numbers, but the first item I needed is 1,025. And in the last one, I need to select a sample from the customer lines. And the first line I'm going to start is page 1, line 11. So how can I do that? I will go back to Excel here. And here I have the sales invoices. First, I will divide 6,000, which is the population, divided by 75 to get the intervals. So here, my interval will be 80. And in my exercise, I say I need to start my first item by 39. So here is going to be 39. Then I will select the next one in a systematic way where I add 39 plus the interval 80. In the next one, I add 119 plus the interval. And next one, 199 plus 80. And we keep going like this. We add the item plus the interval. So in this way, we select the items here in a systematic way. And this is the reason we call it systematic sampling. And we can do the same here, where we add the item plus the previous number plus 80 for all of them. So we call it systematic sampling. I will leave number 9 and 10. You can do it at your own. How can I do it for the bill of lading? It's the same. We get here 6,250 minus 1,000. We get 5,250 divided by the sample size, 75. And then I start by 1,025. And then I add 1,025 plus the interval 70. Then 195 plus 70, going like this.